Okay, I thought I'd just quickly point out that a lot of these two chapters, or these three, power, relationships, and conflict, draw a lot from these two journal articles that I'm showing right up here at the very top of the screen. I invite you to look at them. There's no pressure for you to read them at all, but they're very interesting, and they kind of form the dual notions, or the notions of commitment and trust. And this is where the actual research came from that supports a lot of this chapter. The other one is we're going to talk about relationship velocity in this second half. So I just thought I'd show these to you. Kind of interesting that this relationship velocity, which was a pretty heavy study by Palmentier, as a matter of fact, this little chart you see right here, in terms of the change of customer commitment over time, you're going to see that in the slides that are going to show up. So just thought I'd pop that into you. Okay, so let us move on, and we'll go into the second half and start talking about channel relationships. So we talked about, the first part was we talked about the importance of commitment. And now we're going to talk about the other side of that, and we're going to talk about trust, okay? And I'm sure if there's anything that you know about me now, is that when I give out something like this and I state about trust, one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to give you what I consider to be the definition. And so in trust, what is the definition for that? The definition for trust is it's a concept in which another party acts to the other party in an honest way. The concept that the other party will stand by their word, that they are sincere, that the other party acts in a benevolent fashion. Those are all examples of what trust is. Trust is the conceptualization that the other partner acts in an honest, forthright, and a sincere manner. And trust is so important. In order for someone to believe, it has to believe that the other party is acting in a way of mutual well-being. And so it is important. Trust is necessary for any channel relationship to function on the long run. And one of the more difficult things about trust is that trust initially has to be given. And so we all tend to be trustworthy, or we hope that we all. And in many ways, it is one of those things that in Americans is that we have a tendency in the initial stages to be trusting. And it's just part of the nature of which we are, no matter how cynical we necessarily get. And so trust is the important dual concept along with commitment, because without commitment, there is no trust, and without trust, there is no commitment, okay? And so what do we need, or what do we get from trust? Well, the first one is that we get what, or we expect or hope for, is the need for an economic satisfaction. Now, when I say economic satisfaction, it's important for you to also note that satisfaction for me has an emotive content to it as well, okay? Economic satisfaction is a positive, affective, not logical, not cognitive, but it is an affective response to the economic rewards that are generated in a channel relationship, all right? And if you notice that I say that when I'm talking about it, I'm not using its relationship as a logical thing. I'm talking about it in an emotional way. And economic rewards tend to be typically financial, but it's important to understand that economic satisfaction is emotional. It's very difficult to compare economic satisfactions, or let's just say economics or financial rewards across an organization, all right? We generally compare it to several baselines, and those baselines tend to be where we were, where we are now, how we're doing in relationship to others, and basically all of those things are connected with a reward or a good feeling that is generated that we are being justly compensated for our efforts, all right? Economic satisfaction increases trust when we feel happy that our relationship is rewarding. Then that builds trust and it builds relationships. And then the relationships and trust yield or will lead to more economic satisfaction. And so this is what's known as the virtuous cycle, is that one follows another, and we have success from one to the next to the next. And so this personal need for this general economic satisfaction ultimately leads to a very grounded sense or feeling of success. And so we talk about that, these economic satisfaction. And it's important for us, as we've talked about before, to come up with actions that drive those. And so the satisfaction as it goes, it is not only interpersonal, it applies at the organizational level, and it gets reproduced over and over and over again through daily interactions. And so what are the two drivers of economic satisfaction? How do we know when we are doing the things that create those things? Remember, we are known not by our words, but by our deeds. And so what are the deeds? What are the things that we do that do this? Well, the first thing is in our daily, day-to-day activities, there's an absence of dysfunctional conflict. And so once again, to define dysfunctional conflict, this is lingering, unresolved, intensive disputes. That is what dysfunctional conflict is. Things that are already on the table, that never seem to change and never seem to stop. And no matter how we end the conversation, these things still are there. It is this lack of dysfunctional conflict, the ability to clear the table. If you don't have dysfunctional conflict, that is one of the leaders of economic satisfaction and trust. And the other is the absence of coercion on the other side. In other words, we're not using coercive power. We're doing positive things that show that we are sincerely committed. And how do we do that? Well, it's all about being understanding of the other member. We ask them for advice, which means that we trust their word. We ask if we can help. We readily exchange information. Our partners are our partners, and there is an interaction there. And then the last thing, this has to go back with our original discussion in relationships in being selective. We are also finding partners that have similar goals to us. And this is known as goal convergence. And so if I were to remark back to the commitment trust article in Relationship Marketing by Morgan and Hunt, one of the key factors that they talk about is shared values. And shared values is consistent with goal convergence. It means that we are working towards the same properties. Now, it doesn't mean, once again, as I've talked about, independent organizations have their own mission statements. However, you can have similar goals. So let's say Footsloggers wants to be the #1 seller of a given item in this area when it comes to that. Let's say also that the manufacturer wants to be the #1 seller of that item in this area as well, and they consider Footsloggers to be their partner that's going to achieve that success. This is an example of goal convergence. Another thing that we can do is that when it comes to making decisions, we can have those decisions take place outside the given stronger structure. Centralization, once again in this, putting it in context, means decisions that are made by the upper echelon of an organization. One of the management styles of Ronald Reagan in the 80s is his ability to give decision-making to individuals down the channel and to also give them the power to make those choices as well. And so that's extremely important. Centralization offers a way of marshaling forces to get things done. However, it sows the seeds for distrust in that those individuals downstream can't make logical choices. Now, the second one, formalization, is part of the decision-making process. And this is the belief that rules and explicit procedures are important. Now, the difficulty with formalization in the bad way is that if it so structures the day-to-day activities, then it makes it difficult for individuals within the organization to have some freedom. However, formalization can be a good thing when it spells out clearly what are the tasks to be performed and who are responsible for them. It can enhance positive attitudes. And as a matter of fact, and this is important as well, rules and responsibilities and levels of governance, when they're spelled out, can be a welcome blanket for your employees. And so an example, what that means is that an employee knows exactly what kind of ability to exercise decision-making. And it's sometimes better to take the bigger decisions away because it means that the employee at a given level is not having to make choices far beyond his pay grade to make them. And so it can be comforting when an employee can say, I'm sorry, I don't have the authority to do that. It can be a saving thing for them as well. And so formalization and centralization, depending on the way that they're taken, can be enormous advantages. Now, with all of this having been said, there's no way to guarantee that we're going to create trust and economic satisfaction. All that management can do is create the structure. And we can hope that in the implementation, that ultimately what we do is we achieve some success and find some way of creating a long-lasting relationship. It is slow, it is expensive, and it is uncertain, but it is the only process that we can hope to create that creates something that lasts. Now, one of the most important things, and probably the thing that you must implement because the absence of it is worse, is you must create the perception of fairness. Relationships can be damaged and in many other ways aggravate the negative effects if one side or another is not considered fair. It is a source of unresolved conflict. It can be perceived as being opportunistic. And so there are two modes of being fair that we need to talk about. Now, the book uses these, and I don't like the way they go back and forth because they don't really explain them. And one of them, sorry. One of them is distributive justice, or it's also called distributive fairness. The other is known as procedural justice. Procedural justice, or it's known as procedural fairness. We will use these interchangeably as far as you're concerned. They justice or fairness, I don't know why they go back and forth and they don't explain it in the book. As far as you're concerned, it's the same. Distributive justice means that rewards and benefits are distributed in a fair process. In other words, once again, we're looking at the equity principle, an honest day's work for an honest day's wage. And so when it comes to doling out whatever the goodness is that the individual perceives that whatever they received, it was equitable for what the work that they've done. Procedural justice is being treated fairly in a day-to-day process or a day-to-day fashion. And so what this means is that during the normal give and take of a day, you're treated fairly. In the normal things that it takes to do your work, you are perceived being treated fairly, that your work is being done, that you're not overly burdened. You're just being treated equitably. You're being treated fair. And those two things are extremely important when it comes to building trust, is that in both upstream and downstream, you are being treated fair. So, both parties, what will happen is that both parties, once again looking for a baseline, will be looking for a way of deciding whether or not they're going to be treated fairly. And so what they will do is they will measure against their own inputs. They will look at the benefits that are derived by comparable individuals on their same level. They'll look at benefits available from the next best alternative. And they'll look at other parties as well, okay? And once again, it is the equity principle into practice. Low rewards are given for those who invest little. Great rewards are for those who invest a lot, okay? When you invest heavily in your relationship, you should be rewarded as well. And so this is the ultimate importance of what fairness is whether or not you're being treated fairly. Right after World War II, the Japanese, the United States occupied Japan for 7 years, from 1945 to 1952. And Japan was taken from a feudalistic society that was dated in the 15th and 16th century to a modern parliamentary system in 5 years or even less. And one of the ways was the adaptability of the Japanese and the willing to trust, and also was the stewardship of General Douglas MacArthur. Now, you can say what you want about him in World War II, but one of the things that he was judiciously fair when it came to them. After World War II, there were individual soldiers who committed acts of atrocities, and MacArthur not only judged them and tried them and sentenced to them, but several of them were actually put to death as well. And the Japanese looked upon this as a very fair thing. About 3 months after the occupation, there was actually another example in which the Americans exhibited fairness. There was a news story, a little girl got hit by a car in Tokyo, and 3 American soldiers happened to be there when it happened. The soldiers rushed up to him, they took care of the child, they bandaged the wounds, they got the child to the hospital and saved the child's life. And then the Japanese newspapers, they looked at this as a very honorable thing and a very fair thing that these Americans did, in that they treated this Japanese child as they would treat another American. And overnight, it changed the Japanese perception of Americans and American soldiers. And so it is fairness above all things that helps us to perceive whether individuals are just. And so above all, we must consider fairness. Okay, so we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about relationships, okay? And so one of the things that this chapter notes about fairness, about relationships, and it's a good thing to note, is that relationships are not a linear thing, all right? It's important to note that relationships, like people, are inconsistent, volatile, they can be rewarding or unsatisfying. And what this does is it paints a kind of a life cycle of channel relationships. And as I said before, this is not a purely linear fashion. We can go from awareness to commitment practically overnight, depending on the immediate circumstances, but it does do a good job of painting the overall relationship life cycle. And so this is a very good cheat sheet that you can use when it comes to the test, and we're going to use this to talk about the 5 stages, which are on the next slide, but I'm going to use this because it's easier to see, okay? And so the first relationship stage is what's known as awareness. And this is when, it literally as it sounds, is that one organization knows the other exists, considers the possibility of them as being a feasible exchange partner, but there's actually very little interaction. It's kind of a, I know of this person. One player may recommend another. Physical proximity matters because they know where each other is. You may have had some experience with transactions in other domains. In other words, you know of them doing other things, and that's possible. So when I was a computer store manager in Lafayette, we all kind of knew each other. So I knew the manager of Entree, I knew the manager of Intercomp, and you are aware of your contemporaries out there, and you have an idea of just about how much they know. And so this is where the awareness stage is. The next is that you go into the exploration of what it would be like to have that individual as a channel partner. And so what you see is testing and probing by both sides. you may ask your opinion on one thing versus another. You start to have a certain amount of interdependence. It wasn't unusual for me to call the manager of Entree and ask him a question and him to call me. The owner of Entree actually worked for the computer store I worked for before he took the managership where he went. So we knew each other pretty well. You're a little bit selective in what you reveal. There has to be reciprocity, and so there's a give and take that starts. And you start to have norms that emerge in your actions and your activity together. You start to play roles in the way that you talk. One person may be more informative, another person may be more judgmental. Those are the kinds of things that start happening. And that what you find is that each side starts to influence each other as well, and you start to test each other a little bit as well. And this is the phase in which it's very easy for each side to terminate each other. Well, the next stage is where you jump in big, all right? And then it's a rapid movement into expansion. Expansion usually occurs very rapidly in a short time period. And then you start seeing things like activities that would be considered taking risks, giving away personal information, or special skills that you may not necessarily want to give up. You see that your goals start to become more congruent. You're moving in the same direction. You find that you have a greater satisfaction in the interactions. And the thing that's also important is that the momentum needs to be maintained. Both parties start to seek new areas and new avenues in which they can explore together. And then finally, you're at the stage of commitment, where each party invests to build and maintain that relationship. You're looking at the long time horizon, and you're also maybe aware of other alternatives, but you're putting them off. You're not making any leaps into any short-term commitments that bring you away from that individual, and you find that there's a high mutual dependence and trust with each other. And you start to see also the need and the desire to resolve conflicts together, so that you start adapting to each other. You start to try to resolve those things, and you find that there's a very high mutual dependence together. And so you find loyalty and adaptability, and also kind of a willingness to be able to be able to rationalize difficulties, like, well, that they've gone through a bad day, it's a hard thing, so I'm going to ignore whatever was going on in that particular conversation. And so the last is decline and dissolution. And this is basically when the relationship starts to die, all right? It's generally sparked by one side. Relationship growth requires two sides, but usually one side starts the death or decline of a relationship. A lack of commitment on one side, once again, we have to look at the equity principle. But a lack of commitment on one side means an equal lack of commitment on the other side as well. The dissolution can be abrupt. It can be done over an amount of time. But the key feature is that one individual or one corporation will slide away, and then the other side of the other corporation will mutually start to part. And you see that there's a resolution, and eventually both sides will discontinue. So here's some of the things to note about managing these stages. So the first is that the deployment takes time. And if the targeted partners don't do business together, then there has to be some way of throwing them together at one time. You've got to find a way to initiate the relationship. And as I said before, relationships, like any personal relationship you've ever been through, they're rarely linear, they're rarely orderly, or even sequential as the stage is set. As a matter of fact, what you see as a linchpin of relationships is the concept known as relationship velocity, which is a stronger predictor of the performance And it basically says, once again, it's not a constant scale. It's a dramatic increase and a decrease. And it is a decision heuristic in that people will jump in with both feet. And so as I showed you that slide before, here's that slide again. This is the thought that commitments are rarely linear, okay? And so what you will see is that you will see positive commitment rise rapidly, and just as equally, you'll find a negative commitment velocity at the same time. It fits and starts, it ups and downs. The care and feeding of a relationship requires, quite simply because it is a volatile thing, for there to be a constant kind of investment in the relationship itself. And so what you hope to do is you hope to be able to maintain your relationship, but relationships always require something being done. If a partner begins to suspect that the other partner is taking advantage of the spirit of that, then what you find is that you will find it equally going down. The relationship will spiral downward, performance will decline. You'll find that mutual idiosyncratic investments may continue to form, as well as a relationship with congruent goals. And so what that means is that if you're willing to have the relationship survive, you have to find common ground in the relationship itself. Wherever both sides can find a common ground, then there's a reason for it to continue. And these unique investments that don't pay back to yourself, idiosyncratic, it just simply means this: giving somebody something and not necessarily getting anything in return. That's kind of what an idiosyncratic investment is. Those things help to continue relations to perform. Now, how do you manage this in a world in which everything is imperfect in its own way? Well, what successful channel members need to have is they need to have a portfolio. If I'm a manufacturer, I want a portfolio of downstream channel partners in different stages of relationships, okay? Each relationship is going to be on a different stage. Someone will be just awareness. I know of these people just in case. I have a committed relationship over there, and know that each one of these is in a different stage. And by the very same token, a downstream member needs a portfolio of suppliers and brands to cover assorted needs. And so success in relationships is going to be a test question somewhere or another. Success in relationships is managing relationships, all of which who are on different stages, okay? It is having multiple partners and having those multiple partners ready in case damage happens. And so if you are a marketplace member of Amazon, you should, for your own safety's sake, have a marketplace in eBay and in Walmart and Alibaba and wherever you can, because quite simply, the truth is that investing in a single channel relationship can be detrimental, and it may even cost you your business. So, kind of wrapping this up, relationship quality is all of the range of variables that reflect the status of a relationship. And so it means the combination of your commitment, how much you trust them, and the overall satisfaction, all right? And realize that all of those, if you add those together and they're all equal, then what it says is that the relationship is on a sound footing. But wherever you have a lack on one of those, it is a critical issue. However, if I have trust, that one thing, even if I don't have a commitment or a satisfaction, it's always possible that that individual can use me again. As a word of warning, folks, I would never cut off a relationship other than if it's impossible. because you never know. There's always the old saying, always give your enemy a chance to be your friend. And so the last thing we're going to talk about in talking about relationships is the concept of the multi-channel versus the omni-channel in relationships. Okay, so our definition of the multi-channel is multiple channels that tend to act as a silo. They are individual and independent of each other. Omni-channel is a seamless integration of all of the channels together and all of the channels' functions as well. Just putting that into your head, okay? You expect that in an omni-channel context, interdependence and commitment are greater, or let's just say have to be greater than they would be in a multi-channel context. It demands in an omni-channel that there's a commitment at a deeper level, and there would be multiple relation-specific investments, and each one of those has to be unique and different, okay? Trust and commitment have to be seamless with the overall members downstream, otherwise there can be chaos at the other end. So I ordered desks from Amazon, and I was waiting for 3 weeks to get the desk in for my children. And about a week and a half into it, I got an email from Amazon saying, these marketplace members are no longer partners in our situation. Please inform us if you do not get your delivery, because we have not been able to get a verification of it. So I waited, and yesterday was the 3rd day, and I said, I did not get it in, a request a refund. I got a refund within 30 minutes. And one of the reasons why is I probably have, given him his first million, no doubt about it. But the other fact of that is that omni-channel requires whoever the channel captain is, they have to be absolutely strong and almost, invulnerable when it comes to be able to be a partner, because the most trust they need is the downstream member. They need trust and commitment from me. And the only way to do that is to lend it out first, okay? So in a multi-channel environment, it's important, but in an omni-channel environment, it is absolutely essential. So this is just kind of a little chart here to tell you the difference between the two. And so the integration between them has to be seamless in the omni-channel. Multi-channel is siloed. The commitment must be deep in the omni-channel, whereas the multi-channel, it's more perfunctory, it's not as high. The relation-specific investments, always in the omni-channel, a Amazon or a Walmart must have a higher commitment, and then the multi-channel, it can be variable. And then, of course, an interdependence, the need to connect together, that's at its maximum in the omni-channel versus the multi. Okay, so we are finished with chapter 4. We will spend the next week and a half talking about conflict, and we will have our next test a week from Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. And so, as I said, we've got another week and a half to cover commitment, and then the next test will be chapters 3, 4, and 5. Okay? Okay, folks. Good to see you. Good to hear you. See you folks online. Have a great day, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.